So for this tutorial for the Angel Flight West Outreach Portal, we're going to talk about how to complete the outreach form. The outreach form is used to capture information about outreach-related events. So some examples of those could include an in-service visit, when you go and visit people in a hospital and give a presentation to one or more people. When you attend a conference, such as you man a booth at a healthcare conference or at a pilot conference. And the outreach form can also be used to capture information about media events, such as newspaper articles, television stories, or radio stories. Why do we capture this data and why is it important? Now, we understand that filling out the form is no fun and data entry is not anything that anybody looks forward to. But it's extremely important information, and we'll show you how it's used to give you a sense of why we go through this process of capturing these reports and why it's so important that we capture reports for each of the outreach events that we perform. And when you complete outreach activities out in the wings as a volunteer, the work is not really done until the outreach form is completed. And the reason for that is that you're not really maximizing your efforts, your volunteer efforts, without providing us with as much information as possible about the outreach event. This data is critical to us in two main areas. One is grant reporting, and the other is to follow up with these leads, either whether they're healthcare professionals or possible pilots, to try to convert those leads into people who use the system, or in the case of pilots, who volunteer. So unless you provide us with the data in the outreach form, then we can't really do that, and therefore your efforts are not being maximized. Let's start with a grant reporting example. More and more grant reports or grant requests are tied to specific projects. So for example, you might go to a foundation and ask them to support the efforts to recruit new requesters in their region, in their specific geographic region. The specific funding request might include funding for attending a conference. And then there'll also be goals. So they'll say, in this time, we're going to recruit 10 new requesters, and therefore we're going to generate X number of new flight requests. It's very important that we are able to report on these outreach activities when the grant period is over to show that we're utilizing the grant funds for the reasons that we promised and the ways that we promised. So the grants team uses these outreach reports to compile their reports to the foundations. If we don't have sufficient reporting, if we don't capture all of the events that we've actually done and we're not able to report those specifically, then that jeopardizes future grants that we might get from the same foundation. So it's extremely important that we have complete outreach reports, that we have outreach reports for all of our events, and that they're detailed. So the detail is important. You'll have the opportunity in the outreach form to specify the individual contacts that you made, individual people that you met with, presented to, or in the case of a conference, maybe that you met. And grants are often tied to specific numbers of new leads. So capturing these individuals is extremely important in the outreach form. However, anecdotal reports are also very helpful. Anything we can do to kind of humanize the report really helps make the funder feel good about the grant that they've made and increase the chance that they'll provide additional funding in the future. So for example, you may have met someone and they've used Angel Flight in the past, and they talk about what a great service it is and how much it helped people. That's the kind of thing, if you can report that back, the grants team will put into the grant report, and it really helps round out those grant reports. And since the grants are often tied to specific geography, it's important that you think carefully about the geographical parameters. So try to be as broad as possible within reason. So for example, if you're attending a healthcare conference, that healthcare conference is obviously located in a specific area, but maybe it brings in people from lots of other areas. Try to include as many of those other areas, again, within reason as possible, because if there's a grantor that's included in one of those outlying areas that people are coming from, then we can include that in a report for them as well. And let's talk about the lead cultivation example. Now, when you do an in-service visit, you'll be presenting to any number of people. It's important to capture as many of specific contact information from as many of those people as possible, including name, phone number, and email. And that includes any kind of personal interactions you can get, whether you've met them at a conference or in an in-service. We use that information to follow up, and we'll be communicating with them on a variety of different levels in order to try to convert them to a person who actually requests the service. You probably know from sales that it takes many contacts to convert a lead. And so that's the part that we're going to do after you're done creating that introduction, generating that contact. But without the information, without the contact information and who did you meet, then we're not able to do that. And really, then you're not maximizing the efforts that you've put into that outreach event. All right, so let's switch over to the form and we'll go through an example of how to fill it out. So you're going to log into the outreach portal and you're going to end up on this home screen. And then you use this link here to create a new outreach form. So we're going to start by giving this a campaign name. So let's say we'll say this was an in-service visit to XYZ Hospital. So then you're going to provide the volunteer's first and last name and email. And this is generally going to be you, but in some cases you might be filling this form out for someone else. So you might just put in your first name and last name and then your email. And you're going to choose an outreach category from one of these events. You can use one or more. So in this case, we're going to say that this was a hospital or clinic visit. And then this is where we have the opportunity to provide individual names of contacts or leads. And the difference between a contact and a lead is that a contact is a person who has already had interaction with Angel Flight West, either as a pilot or as a requester. So most times you're going to be entering leads because these are people who have not yet used Angel Flight West and you've introduced them to the service, and now we want to be able to follow up with them and try to convert them to a contact. So your first step will be to search for them, and let's just say this person's name is Anne. And you look through the list and you see that this person is not already in our system as a lead. And you'll add a new person. So we're going to identify this person as a prospective requester. We're going to put in their first name and their last name. We're going to put in their phone number. Their title is Discharge Planner. Their email is, and then the name of their company, which in this case is the XYZ Hospital. And we'll save that. And we'll essentially repeat that process for all the different people that we've met in this particular outreach event. Now, what are some reasons why a lead might already be in the system? So it's possible that in the course of planning this outreach event, this was based on a lead that had come into the system some other way. Like let's say they responded to a Facebook advertisement, or they filled out a form by having found us on the website or something like that. In that case, some people might already be in the system. And if they are, then all you need to do is just choose them from this list and add them, and they'll appear. If this is a situation where you are meeting someone who has already used Angel Flight West, and this is not an uncommon scenario where they bring you in to talk to other colleagues of theirs at the facility, and they will be a contact in the system. That process is the same. You just basically choose contacts and you'll search that person's name and you'll just choose them from the list. However, in this case, you don't have an option to add a new contact. And that's because the assumption is that anybody that is a contact in the system is someone who's already has already had an affiliation with Angel Flight. So they would be added because of their affiliation with Angel Flight, and you'd not be able to add a new contact. If you want to add a new person to this outreach form and you think they're a contact but you don't see them in this list, then just go ahead and add them as a lead. Okay, so now let's assume we've got all the people that we've met with added into the system. You can also provide an approximate number of attendees. This might be more appropriate for a situation where, let's say you speak to a group of people and you're not collecting the names of everybody. Like, let's say it's a conference presentation and it's a room full of people. Maybe maybe there were 65 people in the room. This would also be something you could use if it was a media piece, and you might try to identify the rough circulation of that, whatever that media is. Here's where you describe the activity. You'd say it was an in-service visit. Who are the people that you met with? What was the nature of the facility? And this is, again, a place where any kind of anecdotal information is really helpful for the grants team. This is where you choose the geography, and again, you can pick multiple regions. You can either use the control option to select multiple, and then use this arrow key to bring them over. And again, try to be as broad as you possibly can without still being reasonable. So this field is also very important. This is the name of the organization that you contacted. In the case of the in-service visit, this is going to be the name of the hospital. And again, we're going to search because we have an existing database of facilities, and we want to make sure not to create duplicates if we've already got it in the system. So we'll follow the same process, and we'll search for the XYZ facility, and we'll see that just this one kind of dummy example comes up. We do have the opportunity to add a new facility, just like we did with the contact. So we can provide that information there. But if we do search and we find that it is a facility that's already in the system, we can just choose that from the list. If you have any additional suggestions for responses or follow-up, you can enter it here. Like, you might say that you promised to send brochures. And then finally, the date of the presentation is also very important information. Again, since these grant requests are usually specific to time periods. So then finally what you do is you would just save that information. And now it will show you the information that you have just entered in the outreach form. And notice that this is identified as a campaign, and in Salesforce, our outreach reports are essentially campaigns, and that's how we track them. So if you want to go back and you want to look at a campaign in the past that you've for an outreach form that you've already filled out, that's going to be under campaigns, and I'll show you that in a minute. So for the time being, you can also add related activities to this particular campaign, and one of those activities might be to create a task. So you can create a task for yourself, or you can create a task for somebody else, like, for example, for Ivan. And you can ask him to contact somebody. You can ask them to follow up. You can make a task for yourself to follow up with someone at a particular time, and this will then remind you to follow up. So these kinds of tasks you can create any number of those. So as I mentioned, you may want to look up outreach forms that you've filed in the past. These would be listed under campaigns. And if it's a recent one that you've just created, it's going to show up here. And you can go here and you can view it. If it's a outreach form that you added in the past, then you would go and you would look up outreach reports. And you could search for something that maybe identifies it, or you can always use this top level search, which searches anything in the system. So you're looking for something having to do with the Reno Air Races, it's going to bring up 2 campaigns having to do with Reno Air Races, and then you can go back and look at the campaign that way. So that is how you complete an outreach form in the Angel Flight West Outreach Portal.